Hello, and welcome to the next edition of the Conference Board Sustainability Watch series. My name is Anuj Sosh, and I lead the Sustainability Research Practice for the Conference Board Sustainability Center in Europe. Circular economy has become a key part of sustainability lexicon. And while in the backdrop, more and more companies are embracing digital to create more value. In this webcast today, we will explore what role digitalization, if any, can play in enabling a transfer to circular economy. And I'm really pleased that we've been joined by two experts in the field to talk about this topic with us. I would like to welcome my guests, Annika Hedberg. Annika is the Head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at the European Policy Center, in short EPC, in Brussels. She has been with EPC for over 10 years and during this time has worked on a range of policy areas including climate, energy, circular economy and industrial transformation. She has a master's in public international law from University of Finland and a degree from the London School of Economics. Welcome, Annika.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Dr. Lucas Berkum. Lucas is a partner at Hunton Andrew Kurth LLP and has been practicing law for over 30 years. He has experience in regulatory and trade, as well as liability and transactional work. He also serves as the Council Director for the PA Network Environment and Regulatory Affairs for the Conference Board in Europe. Welcome, Lucas. Before we proceed, some housekeeping issues. Firstly, this webcast is for you, so please ask questions as they crop up. You can do that by typing questions on the bottom left side of your window. You can download the presentation as well as the report, which we have made available on digitalization circular economy through the download tab, which is again in the bottom of your screen. You may change the view to a full screen view to see the videos or the PowerPoint by clicking on the four arrows as you can see on the screen right now, which is on the top right for your window. Lastly, this program would be made available on demand, so you can always share a link with your colleagues to watch it later. We also offer professional development credits for this program. So if you're interested in availing those, these are only available during the live webcast, and do type in your name and email address when the prompts come up. I understand there are 3 prompts during the webcast. So without further ado, I would like to first ask Annika to set out what circular economy is very briefly, so all of us are at the same starting point.
Thank you very much. So in Europe, we are starting to have a lot of discussion around circular economy, and it seems almost a buzzword that is sometimes difficult to understand what that actually means. Maybe I can show the slide. So when we're talking about circular economy, what we really are talking about is aiming to maintain the value of products and materials for as long as possible. So we're talking about the whole product and the life cycle and trying to look at how can we, from the moment when we take raw materials to the point when we are designing products, when we are producing them, and then going into a consumption phase when people are using them and then disposing of them, and then in the end when it becomes waste, how do we deal with the waste? It is really about trying to create lasting value and really trying to control the materials better throughout their life cycle and creating more value from their use. And there is a very, very strong economic case that is often being said that goes with the circular economy, and thus there is a strong interest also for business to be interested in this kind of a new economic model.
Thank you, Annika. I really like the phrase lasting value, really profound. Thank you. It is often said that Europe is often pioneering a lot of sustainability policy frameworks. And in this regard, we are talking about circular economy. Something worth noting, of course, is very recent development which happened late last year is the Green Deal. Lucas, can you tell us more about what the Green Deal is and how does it fit in with the circular economy?
Right. Yes, I will be happy to. The Green Deal is a very broad program for legislative and regulatory action endorsed by the European Commission that is currently making its way through the other institutions for endorsement and comment. But the objective of this deal, which was presented in December of last year by the new European Commission, the objective is making the EU's economy sustainable by turning climate and environmental challenges into opportunities. So, in fact, it's sort of a business model, if you will. It's a business model that also should work to bring along everybody within the EU. So there's an explicit objective for this to be an inclusive deal. So not just for industry, not just for a few of the happy member states with strong industries, but something that works across all of the European Union. And it's intended to work across all of the policy areas. The EU Green Deal is also described as a new growth strategy. And the way that the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described it, it is for a growth that gives back more than it takes away. So something that should result in a net positive, which obviously is a laudable objective. But it also will transform, she says, our way of living and working, of producing and consuming to live healthier lives and make our businesses more innovative. So that clearly is a strong objective towards both welfare but also well-being. And Europe wants then to become a global leader by moving first and moving fast to address the climate and environmental emergencies that the EU has identified. As a counterpart to this, there is a clear focus on an industrial strategy as well. Now, this slide comes out of the communication from the Commission on the Green Deal, and it gives you sort of an overview of the various pieces and how they fit together. And I'll review some of these in a bit more detail. Attached to the communication in which the Green Deal is outlined is an annex which sets out an initial roadmap, and that roadmap lists specific actions which are intended to boost the efficient use of resources by a number of more specific plans. And this roadmap is subject to regular updating, but from that roadmap you can tell that there will be a strong focus on a clean circular economy, a clear focus on stopping climate change, reverting biodiversity and nature loss, and also cutting pollution, cutting it even further than is currently already the case under the quite stringent European environmental legislation. It outlines the policies as well as the laws, investments that are needed to reach these objectives, and it outlines the financing tools that will be made available. To give citizens a voice in this process, there will be a so-called climate pact, which will allow them to comment on proposals, provide input, and so on. So that's also part of the Green Deal. The Circular Economy Action Plan will work in tandem with an industrial strategy plan. Clearly, the European Commission sees the circular economy, the green transformation, working alongside the digital transformation, with digitalization being viewed as the enabler for all of this to happen. The Commission also forecasts that achieving climate neutrality and a circular economy will take a lot of time. It will take full mobilization of industry, it says, and given that the lead time for these objectives to be reached is about 25 years, the Commission believes that the whole plan should be put into place in the next 5 years so that the EU can achieve carbon neutrality and a full circular economy by the year 2050. So that's quite an ambitious plan, of course. This Circular Economy Action Plan will guide a transition of all the sectors of the economy. So it's a very broad plan. There are some specifics that are outlined, some specific sectors are identified, and those, as you might expect, are the resource-intense industries on which the focus will be, such as textiles, construction, electronics, and plastics. And there is specific reference to a right to repair as being part of this deal, as well as curbing built-in obsolescence, which has been an issue on the EU's radar screen for some time. A sustainable products policy will support the circular design of all products, and this will build on the existing eco-design regulations already in place at European level. The Industrial Strategy and Circular Economy Action Plan will prioritize reducing and reusing materials before recycling them. So this ties in with the hierarchy of waste management that is already part of EU law for a long time. But in addition, new business models are contemplated. So it is indeed foreseen that companies will not be able to stick with their current business models, but will have to make changes to the way they do business. There are minimum requirements to prevent environmentally harmful products from being placed on the EU market. And here we see a link with the EU chemicals policies. Substitution of hazardous substances by less hazardous substances or non-hazardous substances. That clearly will be part of this program as well. And it's all the more important given that the circular economy will require extensive circularity of materials and thus loads of potential for exposure. Extended producer responsibility will be strengthened. Waste laws will be changed to allow the circular economy to be managed more efficiently. And clearly, new technologies will have to be developed and emerging technologies will be supported to reach the stage of commercialization so that they can support the circular economy and carbon neutrality by 2050. So the European Parliament already endorsed the Green Deal in its broad terms. European Council is to endorse it next. And the Commission, as I mentioned, will bring forward the measures announced in the European Green Deal roadmap as set out in the annex. In March of this year, so next month, the Commission intends to adopt the industrial strategy to address this twin challenge of digitalization, digital transformation, and green transformation. And at the same time, it will come forward with the Circular Economy Action Plan to modernize the EU economy and capitalize on opportunities for the circular economy domestically as well as globally. A part of that focus will also be on developing markets for products that are generated through the circular economy. Now, on this slide, you see some of the specific actions contemplated by the European Commission. And I'm not going to go through these. In the annex, as I mentioned, you'll see an even more detailed list. This is a summary of some of the key actions that gives you a good feel for how broad this program is going to be. So that was it as an introduction to the EU Green Deal, Anu.
Thank you, Lucas. If I may, I guess there's lots to be taken in, but it seems EU's heart and soul is behind making the transition to the circular economy a real thing, which was often looked in distant future. So good, strong vision around making a transition to circular economy. You mentioned, I mentioned early on that we had a recent report published on digitalization as an enabler for circular economy. I'm really pleased that Annika, who's the author of the report, is with us. Annika, I understand you have been working on the topic of digitalization and circular economy for some time now. Can you tell us a bit more about the work you have been doing and the key findings of the report?
Happily. So just to say that obviously for a lot of business, this is not new. A lot of businesses are using digitalization, data, digitally enabled solutions to improve their business models, improve different phases of the circular economy. But we have obviously, as being a policy think tank, we look at especially policies, and we recognize that there's not really a good understanding amidst policymakers on what can digitalization do for circular economy, and how can we ensure that these agendas are better aligned. So back in 2017, we put together a project which really aimed to look at what can data, digital-enabled solutions do to enhance, accelerate this transition, the circular economy transition. And so we had a number of partners that joined us in this effort. We already produced our own policy paper back in July 2019. Now we have also the conference board publication summarizing some of the findings, and we will have an even more extensive paper, or actually a book, coming up in March, with a lot of case studies and hopefully with a lot of food for thought on how these agendas could be better aligned. Also keeping the policy framework in mind, not just that this is a great opportunity for businesses, but we really call for the policymakers to align these agendas, because we see that there's enormous risk that if this is not done in an adequate and sufficient manner, it can actually lead to unwanted consequences. And that also obviously links very well with the Green Deal, that while we are aiming for this new economic growth model and growth strategy, and are aiming for sustainable competitiveness, it's extremely important that we look at all the tools that are available for us and align them in this effort. For way too long, digitalization has been looked at as something very separate from the sustainability agenda, and we really should be capturing the value digitalization can provide in addressing basically one of the greatest, biggest challenges humanity faces today, which is the sustainability crisis. And digitalization has a lot to offer in that. And so I'll be happy to say something on what specifically we see that it could do for circular economy. So we really see that digitalization can work as a catalyst for a circular economy. So I already mentioned earlier the full circle that we have, and I'll be happy to provide some examples on how digitalization can support, be it from the design phase to the production phase, to the actual consumption, and then to recycling, and then to the waste phase. Digitalization can really play a role in enhancing and making the value of products last for longer. And we're extremely excited about these opportunities, and very much hope that also businesses and policymakers will wish to capture on these opportunities. So as said, we really believe that if we are able to combine the circular economy and the digitalization together, what we call digital circular economy, this could become a key driver for a Green Deal. It could help us to mitigate climate change. It could help to address some of the biggest environmental challenges that we face. It could help to enhance industrial modernization, increase competitiveness, enhance innovation, and thus basically help us to achieve the Green Deal. So just wanted to say that the two areas I'll be happy to reflect upon is where we really do see that digitalization plays an extremely important role. One is on improving connections and information sharing. We see applications, smart tax, blockchain already being used to improve information and information sharing across the value chain. And recognizing that one of the key barriers to achieving a circular economy is that information does not flow in the value chain. We really see that digitalization could provide us a breakthrough in achieving circular economy if we did manage to address this challenge. Another area where digitalization can really help is in making products, processes, services, business models more sustainable, more circular. We see a role for robots, advanced computing, 3D printing, connected machines, sensors. All of these can help in this process. And I myself, I'm especially interested in what digitalization can do to enhance design phase, as that's when basically the biggest environmental footprint of a product is designed. And if we can get the design right, that will have implications throughout the value chain of that product. So I think that there's much we can do to use digitalization to improve and design both the processes, but then also the design of the product themselves. And then another one I'll be happy to pick on is on the role of digitalization enabling new business models like service-based business models. There's great scope to do more in that, and that could add a lot of benefits, but we do need to get it right. And if we get it right, it could even lead to dematerialization and thus help to address a lot of the environmental and climate-related challenges that we face today. So, sorry, yes, I'll maybe, yes,
sure, thank you.
Some more examples later.
Cool, thank you, Annika. That's really powerful, and I think so. If I was to pick up some of the things which to build a storyline about, you mentioned about lasting value, long-term perspective of the Green Deal, and of course you set out the business case and how the power of digital tools to actually make that transition possible. Let's explore some of the themes you mentioned in slightly more detail to look at some tangible examples. I mean, you mentioned, companies, the biggest impact often is in the design phase. In your work, what do you think companies are doing, and can you pick out some little examples which can be more useful for our listeners to get a feel of how companies are actually going about doing this? And also, may I remind our listeners that if any questions come to your mind, do type in on the chat box on the bottom left-hand corner, and we will just weave them into the conversation as appropriate. Over to you, Annika.
Yeah, so indeed, we've collected in the paper. We already have a number of case studies being presented, and in our work as well, we find businesses are full of these examples, and it's at the same time it's very rewarding to go there and see that a lot is happening. Often the dots are not connected, so people may not, or businesses they themselves may not realize that actually they are contributing to the creation of circular economy by using digitalization. But just to say that some of the examples, for example, as mentioned, improving information for the sake of greater sustainability is extremely important. And one example here is, for example, from Michelin, who are using sensor system for tires, which then help them to monitor what is happening with the tires, and they're then also able to use the connected devices to inform the driver if there are circumstances that the people should take into consideration, and thus they are contributing to predictive maintenance, which is very important for if we want to be smarter with the resources that we have. Another example, as mentioned, the information transfer and down the value chain, essential, and we have some already in existence. We have a number of solutions being used, for example, barcodes, watermarks, smart tags being used to capture the information in a product and provide relevant information down the value chain, be it to consumers or be it to recyclers. And in the future, where I see that there could be enormous potential is obviously in using blockchain-enabled solutions. We already see that a lot of industries are recognizing that one of the biggest challenges that they have to engage in this information transfer is questions around IPR and not wanting to share sensitive information. And if we're able to create, with the use of digital tools like blockchain, a secure environment for that information to travel, that will be fantastic. That will capture the benefits of that information for the relevant stakeholders down the value chain in a form that they need, and capturing just the information they need. And obviously for the businesses, it can be more attractive as they will be able to then protect the sensitive information. So we see great potential in there.
Can I just stop you over here, and maybe I'll ask a question over here, and just another reminder: the report which Annika was mentioning about can be downloaded from the, if you look at your window, there's a download tab, and the report and the presentation can be downloaded. You mentioned about, and you've given a few examples, the potential. But maybe I'll ask a question to both of you. There is a lot of potential, but what are the key barriers for companies? And Lucas, you have been doing a lot of work with companies in this field. Annika, you've been working on this as well from a different perspective. If there is potential, do you think are companies embracing this in the right level of aspiration and appetite for companies to do this? Both of your takes on this.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's also not an easy question. I mean, there are obviously loads of barriers derived from the fact that you need to take into account all aspects of your whole business in doing these types of things, right? It travels throughout the organization, and almost every piece of your organization has to be aligned along this new model. And then in addition, you have these regulatory and legislative issues that don't make this kind of work easier. Annika already mentioned intellectual property rights. In addition, you have competition law considerations, other types of regulation and regulatory restrictions that may come into play, and so on. I think in the end, one of the most significant challenges is how you integrate all of this information from all parts of your organization, from procurement to production to product design and so on, with the regulatory environment and with all the data you need to achieve your new business objectives and implement your new business model. And I think that's a huge challenge. And some companies have made quite significant progress in working towards approaches that will guide them through this process. And these can be in the form of sort of product stewardship type systems, where you do not only integrate the information from your own company that's relevant, but also the whole supply chain and the value chain associated with particular products can be integrated as well and brought together in this system, where you can not only access the relevant data, but also tie it with the regulatory requirements and so on. And once you have figured out how to do that efficiently, I think you're going to have really a competitive edge.
Thank you.
Maybe I could just pick on just this one example of enabling the information transfer, because for me, I'm quite keen on this because I do see this and there's enormous potential. However, there are obviously enormous barriers to be overcome. First of all, for the businesses, IPRs aside, there's the whole question of trust. To whom do you want to provide that information to? But then also, what is the rationale for you to provide that information? And the businesses really need to see the value of why do they need to provide an information. And this is something that the European Commission is very much looking into. And there is increasing talk about having digital passports for products, which basically capture this idea that we would have an information that would follow a product and would contain the materials and also information about hazardous substances, etc. There is still a long way to go to the day when we will have an actual digital passport for products. But to get there, the first basic starting point, I think, is to create that trust, to create that awareness. Why would that information be needed? What is the information that different stakeholders down the value chain need? What is the information that consumers need? They don't need the same information that recyclers need. What is the information that recyclers need? And can we create a system where the stakeholders down the value chain have only the information that is relevant for them, so that they're not bombarded by a lot of information, which is already the case, and that is happening today. So that's something. It's extremely important. It's also, I would say, as starters, for those businesses who do want to engage in this and want to explore the possibilities, want to be first movers in looking at how can we help to create conditions and the frameworks for enabling that information transfer. Create partnerships with your trusted partners. Looking into maybe closed loop is the starting point, because it is easier to start to get that information flow in a closed loop. When we're talking about much more complex value chains, it becomes extremely complex. Global value chains, the day when we will be able to have digital passport in value chains that are global, that will take a long time. But so that's one of the big barriers that we have, is that we obviously operate in a very, very complex regulatory environment, but also industrial environment. And for businesses to navigate through that, it's very difficult. But so that's where I would say, start with the partners you know, and you can build it from there.
Actually, I think that really encapsulates the point you were talking about, the trust. around why do we make the information available and for what purpose. And if you take small steps to explore that with known trustworthy partners in a closed loop environment, it makes it possible. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, should I
Please,
provide some additional examples?
Yeah, that'd be great, because that
Yeah.
makes it really tangible for our listeners to see that all of these things are, it's quite an embryonic phase, I would say, in the digitalization and the circular economy when you're looking at trying to bring them together. But at the same time, there's lots happening. So yeah, we'll be very happy to hear more practical examples from you.
Yeah. Happily. So what I mentioned earlier, the other area that I'm really interested in and where I see enormous potential is obviously in the design phase. And this is something where we see that digitalization, it's very much taking its baby steps at the moment. And we do see, for example, great prospects with artificial intelligence, which can really make sense of the enormous amount of data available. It will allow us, or could allow us, to play with the numerous materials, but then also make sense of the regulatory environment, which is becoming increasingly complex for designers. And there are safety regulations, there are environmental regulations, a lot of things to be considered when you're designing a product. And if you can help to use the AI to navigate through that complex regulatory environment, and then at the same time come up with more sustainable designs and uses for materials, that would be tremendous for the whole life cycle of the product. So I would say that this is certainly something to be looked into. And so there's one example of a project where they have been investigating how AI can help to play with the materials and manage the complexity that comes with a lot of different materials, and also create new materials. So I think that's something certainly to be kept in mind. And another, obviously, for businesses, improving production and processes. I think that for a lot of businesses, this is given. Being smarter with the resources you have helps you to save costs. So there is an economic incentive for businesses to do this. And obviously, a lot of businesses are very good in using digitalization to enhance processes. But I would like to say that, for example, going and taking it beyond that and looking at new solutions related, for example, using 3D printing can be quite interesting, because we can already see how tremendous benefits it could bring to material use if we're able to capture the benefits with this. And then I could say that just on reuse, repair, disassembly, durability, these are key factors for enhancing circular economy and smarter use of our resources. And we see that there are a lot of solutions already out there. Industrial IoT is well known within business, but we see that there's great potential also to use IoT between businesses and consumers to help consumers to know what's happening with their products and take the measures needed to repair them, for example, already repair them more easily. But then also we see that there are possibilities with using, for example, augmented reality classes to help repair products. We see that there are possibilities with using platforms to guide people to repair and recycle products, etc. So just to say, I would say it's unlimited what we can do with digitalization in this regard. And then I'll finish off with one of my favorite topics again, these new business models. If we look at what really consumers, customers need, and we would design our business models accordingly, we would suddenly rethink that. I think that for many that would lead to rethinking of our business models. And the often quoted example is that people do not need lamps, they need light. And there are a lot of other, others that have been listed here, which just help to exemplify. We're not buying CDs anymore, we're listening to music. It is the servitization is already with us. And if we were able to capture the benefits that can come with greater servitization, it can also bring enormous benefits for businesses. We see that it can help to businesses to form stronger customer relations and also generate more stable revenue streams if they are able to capture the benefits of this. So I think there's certainly more we can do in this space, and obviously digitalization is often the key enabler for these new models. And here are just two examples. We have a lot of clothing as a service, we have home appliances as a service being provided nowadays, and that can really help to enhance a smarter use of our resources and products if we do this in a proper way.
Thank you, Annika. I mean, this is really great. I mean, if I was to take a step back, and you've given examples of across the value chain of a product, and of course the whole notion is, why do you limit it to a product if you can transfer it to a service-based business model? So that's one principle. But at the same time, you have shared examples with us how in different phases of a value product development value chain, you can apply different technologies to make that transition or embrace circular principles in the design as well as subsequent phases to making it to recover the products. Let's take a step back and of course to our listeners, if you have any questions, do type into the chat box at the bottom left. But let me take a step back and ask Lucas and of course Annika as well. When you look at something like Green Deal, what are the implications for companies? I mean, of course, it's not. There are proposals that there'll be action plans. You might have regulations, but what are the implications for companies in Europe and outside Europe? I mean, if a company was to manufacture something in the US or Asia, it comes over to Europe. What are the implications? How would that filter out, and how would that work out in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're quite right that you should distinguish between companies that are based within the EU and those that are based outside the EU, because the implications will certainly differ. Now, of course, as Annika already indicated, many companies operate global supply chains, global value chains. So although they may be based in the EU, their value chains will extend way beyond the EU into other economies where their raw materials or components are manufactured. But let's focus on the distinction between those that are EU-based and those that are outside the EU. Those that are based inside the EU, of course, will be subject to all the regulations that will be derived based on the Green Plan. And that means that those regulations will focus on climate neutrality. So climate neutrality will likely become also something that a business is going to have to worry about. How am I going to achieve climate neutrality by 2050? And of course, there are going to be more specific regulations in terms of how the EU will try to get them there. But it is something that already at this point would require a quite significant focus. There's this focus on pollution-free. Not quite clear what that's going to mean, but clearly there's a further intent to reduce all forms of pollution, be it water or air or solid waste or whatever it may be, in particular, of course, toxic waste. Now, we talked a lot already about circular economy, but linked to that, as I mentioned when I discussed the Green Deal, is also this notion of a toxic-free environment. So this means that increasingly substitution of hazardous chemicals by less hazardous or non-hazardous chemicals is going to be a major focus, given that from the EU's viewpoint, the absence of hazardous substances is really necessary to create a circular economy, because you don't want people to be exposed to hazardous substances if you have materials in circulation for an extended or even indefinite period of time. Now, if you look at the Green Deal from outside the EU, you know you're not going to be subject to it. You know you're not going to have to deal with these same concepts, even although, of course, some countries may follow the EU, and the EU, of course, is pushing quite aggressively other countries to move towards similar concepts and try to take them along in this journey through all forms of diplomacy and other ways of putting pressure on them. But assume that a country is not going to go along the same road or not at the same pace. That company will have to look at some of the other issues that the Green Deal is going to pose. In particular, the concept of a border adjustment tax that is going to have to be introduced, I think, by the EU to compensate for the cost differential, because obviously these programs, in particular the climate neutrality program, is not going to be cost-free. There will be a cost associated with it, so the production cost in the EU will increase, and most likely the EU will want to compensate for that by imposing a tax, a border adjustment tax, on products that are produced in jurisdictions where there are not similar programs in place. So that's something that they surely should keep an eye on, and also keep an eye on whether there are ways to avoid this tax by doing your own thing. Even if you're in a jurisdiction where the law doesn't require it, you might still do a carbon neutral program that might meet the needs and requirements of the European Union. And the other thing, of course, that these companies are going to have to consider very carefully is eco-design. Most companies around the world that ship product to the EU will be familiar with design for the environment concepts, with eco-design of products and the regulations around that. But now we're moving towards this design for circularity, which creates yet other challenges. So they're going to have to focus really carefully on exactly what these rules require, how the systems work that are going to be used to produce this circularity. And of course, given that they might not have extensive infrastructure within the European market, they're going to have to think about what other arrangements they need to put into place to make this all happen and meet the regulatory requirements to avoid trade barriers, because that's in the end a main interest that they have.
Thank you, Lucas. Let me continue on the same theme. We've just got a question coming in, which is exploring it slightly, the same question from a very specific perspective. What would be the implications of Green Deal be for company directors? What accountability it might transfer into? So one is from a company level, but more specifically, what would it mean for a company director?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, not a very easy one to answer, but you see a lot of evolving law around this issue. The liability of directors and officers of companies for environmental violations, for human rights violations and so on is a rapidly evolving field, with cases being filed in the Netherlands, in the UK and other countries as well. Based typically on concepts that go way beyond the traditional liability rules, the traditional rules of negligence and so on. For instance, a company like Shell is being held responsible for what happened in its supply chain all the way down in Nigeria, where there was environmental pollution derived from its operations over there, which may or may not have been caused by sabotage, but that resulted in a case that was brought before the court of the Netherlands, and also before the courts of the United Kingdom, and that litigation is still pending. But the theories that are being developed there are really theories of supply chain liability. You're going to have to pick up some of this responsibility that companies already have picked up for the supply chain, now translates into liability for things that happen not only within their own operations, but within the operations that are operated by third parties. And what is particularly relevant here is what companies say to the world about what they are doing. Because the things that are being referenced in these lawsuits are often statements made by directors, press releases or statements on websites of companies that will say, we are committed to respecting human rights, we are committed to not cause any environmental pollution. And then they say, look, that's what they told us, and look now at what they've done. So you need to also view these things from that perspective again, to sort of take a look at what you're doing from the angle not only of meeting the regulations, meeting the expectations of your business partners, but also of the and customers, of course, but also the potential liabilities that might be associated with that.
Thank you. I hope, Philip, we have answered your question, and do type in any other questions you may have. Just moving on, often there's a notion that regulations can stifle innovation. I'm going to ask a question to both of you. With something like Green Deal, your perspectives on is it going to stifle innovation from a company perspective, or is it something what companies can use to really catalyze the change, transition to climate neutrality and, of course, circular economy?
Shall I start? First of all, obviously, Green Deal, how it's laid out at the moment, it provides a framework for where the EU wants to go, or this principle, where the Commission at this stage wants the EU to go. And obviously, a lot of the details are in the making, and there's a lot of work to be done, as has been highlighted. So we have a number of proposals coming out, not just this spring, but in the course of the next years. And we'll see then what comes out from these strategies and what the concrete legislative proposals will be. But we do see that there is certainly momentum, and this Commission is taking the agenda very seriously and is pushing a lot on the agenda. So you can certainly say that there is a risk that if there is a lot of regulation, it can, and many businesses may react, that it's going to hamper their possibilities to innovate. At the same time, the Commission itself in the Green Deal pushes very strongly and recognizes the role for both for innovation as well as for digitalization as enablers. And we do see in the rhetoric, there is a strong emphasis being made. They do recognize that it is essential that we create the conditions to enhance the benefits and possibilities with innovation in this journey. But the devil is always in the detail, and it does come down to whether you're talking about the specific circular economy regulation or digital regulation, environmental regulation. How will the businesses then react? And taking that the ambition is what it is, one would assume that what we are talking about is an economy-wide, society-wide transformation, and this will touch upon everyone, and this will touch upon people, and will touch upon how businesses operate. And if the European Commission and if the EU are serious about the rhetoric, one would expect that this will lead into some very tangible, concrete effort on their side. And indeed, the risks are that the companies will feel that they are being over-regulated. That is a fear.
Thank you. Lucas, your perspective on this?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of literature on the effects of regulation on innovation. And I think what that has shown is that everything depends on what the regulation does, what it tries to do. And if you sort of make a broad distinction, you could say that generally speaking, means regulations, so regulations specify the means you should use, are generally not very innovation friendly because they basically tell you how to do things, right? So based on that, increasingly regulators are moving towards more result-based regulations which specify a result but don't tell you how to get there. So then you can figure out how to get there, and typically those regulations are much more efficient and much more innovation friendly than the means regulation. So that's one thing. Now, it doesn't mean that the EU never uses means regulations, they still do. But I think in the context of the Green Deal, there will be an effort made to try to focus more on results rather than means. Now, of course, it's also the case that the more specific you get and the more granular you get, the less opportunities you leave for businesses to maneuver and do things in a way that works for them, while still achieving the general purpose of the regulations. And that is another risk, that so the marginal benefits of regulation often decrease pretty quickly after you've done sort of the broad sketch. But nevertheless, regulators like to get into details and like to regulate, and therefore they sometimes over-regulate. But I believe that in the case of the Green Deal, and given the sensitivity around the issue of innovation, there will be lots of sort of relatively open-ended regulations that will set targets and set objectives, but will not regulate down to the detail, which means there will be opportunities for companies to engage in innovation. And as with all regulations, some avenues will be closed off, other avenues will open up as a result of the regulation. But if you have sort of an open-ended regulation, then there's a lot that can happen. And as John Metzler here of the Conference Board always likes to say. I mean, when it comes to innovation, culture, of course, is very important. And if you have the right culture within the company that really provides the environment where innovation can flourish, you can achieve probably very, attractive results.
Thank you. Let me take a step back and again, pose a question to both of you. So, in my mind, if I was a listener, you have set out, of course, you've set out, Annika, very, very clearly, and you had a number of examples about how companies are experimenting, playing with the digital tools to actually progress, embed digital into enabling circular economy. If often, we look at startups, it seems, by no means I'm claiming it's easy, but it's often easy to, you hear that it's easier for startups to embrace all of these technology, all of these tools. But for a large multinational company, if they were to make a start on this journey of digitalization and circular economy, having those two things come together, what would the first 2-3 steps be?
When it comes to, for example, capturing the benefits of digitalization, I think that it's also about going out there and seeing what others are doing. What are some of the opportunities captured also by the big competitors, and I think it's very important, go also beyond your own sector, because there are a lot of developments happening in other sectors that could be relevant for your sector. And so capture those benefits, learn from those. Then at the same time, yes, startups may have it easier at the start. Their problem again is then the scale up and being able to turn these sometimes fantastic ideas into something big and concrete that can actually help to accelerate the change. It's some of these great ideas, and some people are calling this appification. It alone will not solve the biggest challenges that we have. We do need a bigger transformation, and that's where it's also very, very important to look at the conditions on how to help the startups and these small and medium-sized enterprises to grow and scale up the solutions. So I would say that the challenges are on all the levels.
Lucas?
Yes, I would say it's, you cannot transform your whole organization, of course, within a year or so. That's a program that takes time. But I think it's important to sort of focus on the priorities. What are your biggest opportunities? And that means not just from looking within your organization, but also given the regulatory environment in which you will be operating, given the product markets in which you're strong and so on. Where are those biggest opportunities? And how can we capitalize on those using digitalization as an enabler, right? Because I think that's going to be key to figure it out. And once you can figure it out, for one particular product or one particular process, and you can then, I think, deploy that throughout your organization. But in the end, of course, you want to get the whole system right. But to do that, you need to sort of pilot some ideas first before you can get there. And that requires an understanding of your, deep understanding of your own business and the data available and what data you need in addition and so on, but also a sophisticated understanding of the regulatory environment.
Thank you. We are soon going to be approaching the end of our webcast. So if you have any questions, do send them in. Let me try to reflect on some of the key messages, what you have shared with us. And there's lots of things, but I'm going to pick up on a few themes. So what I picked up early on, the phrase about long-term value, which is in relation to circular economy. I think one of the themes which came out, both of you said it indirectly or directly, was having, if companies, as and when companies start to embrace this, having an appreciation of what the current reality is, having an integrated approach. So, often as I think Annika mentioned, all of these things, circular economy, digitalization, other programs are often run in parallel. So how do you actually merge those boundaries, remove the silos to actually bring everything in an ecosystem to start exploring the possibilities? I think, Lucas, you just mentioned which is something which I've written over here about taking little steps, having an appreciation of the current reality, but taking piloting some of the little steps about what a project might look like, how can we experiment to implement and embark on the journey. I think there was two things around partnerships, working with people who've already been on this journey, not just within your sector but outside your sector, to explore what they are doing, how they have gone about doing it, can also provide you with some little simple insights which can help you in your journey to embrace circular economy and digitalization. I think that one of the most important things which you mentioned from a regulatory perspective, which is very important from a company perspective, is begin with the end in mind. So having an outcome-based approach, trying to ask yourselves what impact are you looking to achieve and what is the outcome you're looking to achieve as a result of this program. So having an appreciation of what the future might hold from your customer demands as well as from a regulatory perspective might give you some insights to channelize and focus your efforts. So very briefly, before I do some housekeeping at the end, what would be your final recommendation, takeaway for our listeners be? Annika first.
I would challenge everyone, all the listeners, race to the top. We have the global context. We know what is being asked. We have the Sustainable Development Agenda. We have the Paris Agreement. In Europe, we have the Green Deal, providing the context, the direction, the ambition. And it is now for businesses to capture the benefits that come from embarking on that journey and future-proofing themselves to providing on the market, on that future market, that market of tomorrow, those services, those products, those solutions that will help to solve the biggest sustainability challenges that we have and capture the benefits that come with being on the top.
Thank you. Lucas?
Yeah, I would say, I'm a lawyer, so I would say as you go along pursuing all these great opportunities in relation to the circular economy and digitalization, please keep in mind that there is also a risk side to this equation. It's not just about opportunities. And that risk side is all about, from my perspective, understanding the law, regulation, liability, and governance of your organization.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to have had both of you. And you presented, I always look at things, companies always have a spectrum of choices. Of course, you have risks, governance, compliance on one side, of course, race to the top. Really lovely a phrase, Annika, which you mentioned, which is about pursuing opportunities. I think so both of these can go hand in hand. Companies who are making a start, ensure your houses are in order, which is about risk and compliance. But at the same time, once you've done that, you stop making those rapid movements, the rapid pace, take long strides towards the race to the top. That brings us to the end of today's webcast. I've got a couple of more things to share. Race to the top, you mentioned about future opportunities. The next webcast, which is, of course, Sustainability Watch webcast, which we have is the third Thursday of every month, is going to be focusing on sustainable innovation, which is on the 19th of March, which explores how companies can embrace innovation with looking at sustainability from an opportunity lens. So that's coming up in 4 weeks' time. Of course, we have mentioned before, do fill in, take a couple of moments to fill in the evaluation form, as it will help us to improve this program offering for you. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Thank you and goodbye.